pressure reveals what training has hidden. In the moment when everything accelerates, when the room closes in, when the voice tightens and the chest constricts, most people discover they have no structure beneath them. The collapse is immediate. The reaction is automatic. The mind, which seemed capable moments before, becomes a narrow corridor of panic. A presentation to superiors who hold career advancement in their hands. The first question comes, unexpected, probing, designed to expose weakness. The mind blanks. Words that were clear moments ago dissolve. The heart rate climbs. Thoughts begin to spiral. They see the hesitation. This is over. I should have prepared differently. I'm failing right now. The pressure is not in the question. The pressure is in the collapse of internal structure the moment uncertainty appears. Or a confrontation that cannot be avoided. Someone across a table, voice raised, intent on domination. The instinct is to match intensity, to defend, to justify. Or to retreat entirely, to absorb the attack and let resentment build in silence. Both responses share the same origin. The nervous system has already decided the situation is a threat, and control has been surrendered to reaction. Pressure itself is neutral. It is simply intensity concentrated in time. What destroys people is the internal response to that intensity, the cascade of thought, emotion, and physical tension that turns a moment of difficulty into a crisis of capability. The samurai understood this distinction with absolute clarity. They lived in an environment where pressure was not occasional stress but constant proximity to death. A single misjudgment, a moment of distraction, a loss of composure, any of these could end in immediate annihilation. What they developed was not courage in the modern sense, not positive thinking, not emotional control through willpower. It was something more fundamental, a method of perception that prevented the internal collapse before it could begin. This method is rarely discussed in modern interpretations of samurai philosophy, not because it was secret, but because it requires a level of precision in understanding that most people never develop. It sounds simple when stated. It is extraordinarily difficult to embody. By the end of this examination, the mechanism behind samurai calm will be clear. Not as inspiration, not as a technique to practice for 30 days, but as a structural understanding of how pressure operates, why most people collapse under it, and what fundamental shift in perception allows certain individuals to remain functional when others disintegrate. This is not about becoming fearless. It is about understanding what fear is and what it is not. The samurai who mastered this distinction became nearly impossible to defeat, not because they were stronger, but because they could not be destabilized. The samurai class existed in an environment of compressed mortality. Death was not an abstract future possibility, but an immediate neighbor. Training began in childhood and continued without interruption. The expectation was not survival, it was function under conditions that would break ordinary people. A duel could be called at any time. A mistake in protocol could result in ordered suicide. A shift in political alliance could mean sudden combat against overwhelming numbers. Pressure was not an event to prepare for. It was the atmosphere in which life occurred. One strategist from this era fought over 60 duels without a single defeat. His first Mortal Kombat came at age 13. By the time he reached 30, he had killed more skilled opponents than most warriors would face in a lifetime. His analysis was not that he had been braver or more talented than those he defeated. His conclusion was more unsettling. Most people, even trained fighters, did not understand the fundamental structure of strategy. They had techniques, but no foundation. When pressure intensified, their techniques became liabilities because they had no stable perception beneath them. In combat, the difference between life and death is often measured in fractions of a second. The fighter who sees the opening first wins. The fighter who hesitates loses. But seeing the opening requires a specific quality of attention, broad, peripheral, aware of the whole field simultaneously. The moment attention narrows, the moment focus becomes fixed on a single point, the fighter becomes predictable. predictable means dead. Calm was not a philosophical ideal. It was a tactical necessity. The mind that could remain settled while under direct threat could process information that the panicked mind could not access. Modern people experience pressure as deviation from normal. The samurai experienced normal as pressure. The training was designed to eliminate the distinction. If the mind remains the same in training as in mortal combat, then combat holds no special power to destabilize. This required years of conditioning, not conditioning the emotions, but conditioning the perception. The question was never, how do I stay calm? The question was, why would this situation be different from any other? If sitting in a quiet room and facing an armed opponent produce the same internal state, then the opponent has no psychological advantage. The external situation changes. The internal bearing does not. The way of strategy, as it was called, was not spiritual practice. It was practical methodology for remaining functional under threat. The principles were tested in life and death circumstances and refined through generations. What worked was kept. What failed was discarded, usually at the cost of the person who relied on it. This produced a body of knowledge that was ruthlessly efficient. No romanticism, no unnecessary complexity, only what could be verified through survival. The strategist who mastered this way could walk into situations that would paralyze others and operate with full capability. The samurai discovered something that modern psychology has only recently begun to articulate. Pressure does not come from the situation. It comes from the interpretation of the situation. Change the interpretation, and the pressure dissolves. But changing interpretation is not a matter of positive reframing or cognitive tricks. It requires a fundamental shift in how perception itself functions. Most people never make this shift because they never understand that it exists. They believe their perception of reality is reality itself. The samurai who survived long enough to become masters understood the distinction. They knew that what they saw was not what was there. It was what their mind constructed from what was there. Once that distinction became clear, a different kind of stability became possible. In the moment before a duel, two fighters stand across from each other. One sees an opponent who might kill him. His mind floods with threat assessment, survival calculation, fear of pain, fear of failure, fear of dishonor. The other sees a situation requiring strategic response, distance, timing, openings, rhythm. Same reality, different perception. The first fighter is already defeated. The second has a chance. The difference is not in skill level. It is in what the mind does with incoming information before conscious thought begins. This is where the forbidden technique operates, in the split second before thought solidifies into reaction. The technique that kept samurai functional under lethal pressure was not a method of calming emotion. It was a method of dual perception, simultaneously holding two levels of awareness that most people never separate. The first level, immediate, detailed, reactive awareness of the specific threat. The second level, broad, detached, strategic awareness of the whole situation. Most people collapse because they have only the first level. When threat appears, their entire field of awareness narrows to that threat, and the narrowing itself creates the feeling of pressure. Ancient strategists called this perception and sight. Sight is what the eyes register: the opponent's sword, the movement of his body, the distance between fighters. Perception is what the mind understands: the opponent's rhythm, his level of training, his emotional state, the geometry of the space, the timing of the moment. Sight is narrow and detailed. Perception is broad and strategic. In pressure situations, untrained people abandon perception entirely and collapse into sight. They see only the immediate threat. The trained strategist maintains both simultaneously. He sees the sword and perceives the pattern. The sword is data. The pattern is what matters. The reason is structural, not motivational. Under threat, the nervous system is designed to narrow focus. This is evolutionary. When a predator attacks, detailed attention to that predator is survival relevant. Broad strategic awareness is not. The problem is that most modern pressure situations are not physical threats, but the nervous system responds as if they are. The presentation that goes wrong, the confrontation that escalates, the deadline that approaches. None of these will cause physical death, but the body responds with the same mechanism: narrow focus, accelerated heart rate, suppressed rational thought, preparation for fight or flight. By the time conscious awareness recognizes what is happening, the response is already in motion. The strategist's method is to maintain the broad perception even as sight narrows. This is not done by forcing calm. It is done by training the mind to hold two focal lengths simultaneously. In practical terms, while aware of the immediate threat, the attention does not collapse into that threat. Part of the awareness remains expanded, observing the whole field. It is similar to peripheral vision. You can focus on a single object while remaining aware of movement at the edges. The strategist does this with awareness itself. He focuses on the opponent while remaining aware of distance, footing, timing, rhythm, environmental factors, and his own internal state. The opponent cannot become the totality of his awareness because his awareness is structurally broader than any single element within it. A modern professional receives criticism in a meeting. Untrained response. Attention collapses entirely into the criticism. The mind begins immediate analysis. Is this fair? How do I defend? What will others think? This damages my reputation. The criticism becomes the entire reality. Emotional response intensifies. Rational thought degrades. The response, when it comes, is reactive, defensive, emotional, strategic errors made visible to everyone watching. The person with strategic perception experiences the same moment differently. The criticism registers. This is sight, the immediate detail. But perception remains broad. This person is attempting to establish dominance. Others in the room are watching the interaction, not just the content. The response matters more than the criticism. What outcome is optimal here? The criticism is still present, but it is one element in a larger strategic field. It does not command total attention, therefore it cannot generate total reaction. At the highest level of this technique, there is a third state beyond perception and sight. The ancient strategists called it the void. It is not emptiness in the sense of nothing. It is emptiness in the sense of no fixed position. When the mind holds no fixed position, it cannot be destabilized. Most people enter pressure situations with a fixed position. I must succeed. I must not be embarrassed. I must maintain control. These fixed positions create leverage points. Pressure finds the fixed position and applies force to it. The mind that operates from the void has no such positions. It responds to the situation as it is, not as it threatens the fixed position. This sounds abstract, but the application is concrete. A fighter with a fixed position, I must not lose, becomes defensive. A fighter operating from the void simply responds to openings. The first fighter is predictable. The second is not. There is a deeper layer to this technique, rarely understood. The strategists called it movement without design or conception. In the moment of action, there is no deliberation, no internal dialogue, no conscious decision-making process. The action occurs directly from perception without passing through thought. This is only possible when the mind is not collapsed into reactive sight. If awareness is narrow and fixated on threat, every action must pass through the filter of fear, doubt, calculation. If awareness is broad and settled, action can emerge directly from strategic perception. It is faster. It is more accurate. It is not burdened by the hesitation that comes from internal debate. Not because it was kept secret, but because teaching it to someone without the foundation to understand it creates confusion, not capability. The modern mind, conditioned to constant internal narration, cannot easily grasp a state of perception that operates without that narration. Attempts to force it produce the opposite effect: more internal dialogue, more self-monitoring, more pressure. The technique only becomes accessible after extensive training in basic perceptual stability. The samurai who could access this state were rare, even among trained warriors. Those who could maintain it under lethal pressure were rarer still. It was not forbidden in the sense of prohibited. It was forbidden in the sense of nearly impossible to reach without proper foundation. Calm under pressure is not an emotional achievement. It is a perceptual structure. The person who remains calm is not suppressing fear or forcing composure. He is perceiving the situation in a way that does not generate the internal collapse others experience. His nervous system receives the same signals, but his awareness does not narrow in response. The situation is intense, but his perception of the situation remains broad. Intensity is present. Panic is not. This distinction is everything. Pressure begins not with the external situation, but with the recognition that the situation could go wrong. A meeting that could determine career trajectory. A conversation that could end a relationship. A performance that will be judged. The moment the stakes register, the mind begins calculating outcomes. And in that calculation, it finds failure. Not certain failure, possible failure. And possible failure, when examined by an anxious mind, becomes probable failure, then inevitable failure. The spiral accelerates. Each thought generates feeling. Each feeling generates more thought. Within seconds, the person is no longer responding to the actual situation. They are responding to the catastrophic projection their mind has constructed. Intelligent people often collapse faster under pressure because their minds are better at constructing detailed catastrophic scenarios. They see more variables, more potential failures, more consequences. The ability to think several steps ahead, valuable in planning, becomes a liability in pressure. The intelligent mind runs simulations. If I say this, they could respond this way, which would lead to this outcome, which would mean this consequence. By the time the response is needed, the mind has explored 50 failure paths and has no bandwidth left for the actual present moment. Intelligence without perceptual training creates sophisticated paralysis. Motivation intensifies the problem. The person who desperately needs the outcome to succeed adds emotional fuel to the pressure. Every moment becomes weighted with significance. The presentation is not just a presentation. It is proof of worth, validation of months of work, the difference between advancement and stagnation. This added meaning makes the nervous system respond more intensely, which makes the collapse more severe. The motivated person cares more, which means they have more to protect, which means more vulnerability to pressure. Motivation without perceptual stability creates brittle performance. Willpower attempts to override the nervous system response through force. Stay calm. Don't panic. Focus. This creates internal conflict. One part of the system is flooding the body with stress signals. Another part is trying to suppress those signals. The effort itself consumes resources. Willpower is a finite capacity, and pressure drains it rapidly. The person who relies on willpower to stay calm is fighting their own biology. They may succeed for a time, but the moment willpower depletes, the collapse is worse because the suppressed response floods back with accumulated intensity. The core problem is not the situation. It is the identification with what the situation means. The person has decided, this outcome determines my value. This moment defines my capability. This result proves or disproves my worth. Once this identification is in place, the situation stops being a situation and becomes an existential test. The nervous system cannot distinguish between a failed presentation and actual mortality threat. Both trigger the same cascade. The person who identifies their worth with their performance experiences professional pressure as survival pressure. The body responds accordingly. In strategic terms, this is called holding a fixed position. The mind has decided what must happen. I must be respected. I must not look weak. I must succeed. These fixed positions create targets for pressure to attack. Every moment that threatens the fixed position triggers defense. And defense, under pressure, is always weaker than fluid response. The person locked into a fixed position cannot adapt because adaptation would mean abandoning the position. They are committed to an outcome before they know what the situation will demand. This is how people make catastrophic errors while feeling certain they are doing the right thing. A manager receives unexpected criticism from leadership in front of the team. Fixed position: I must maintain authority. Result: defensive response, dismissal of valid feedback, damage to credibility. If the position was not fixed, the response could be adaptive: acknowledge the feedback, demonstrate strength through receptivity, maintain authority through competence rather than defense. An entrepreneur pitches to investors and faces skeptical questions. Fixed position: I must convince them. Result: overselling, desperation signals, loss of composure when faced with resistance. If the position was not fixed, the response could be strategic: answer questions directly, demonstrate confidence through clarity, read the room and adjust approach in real time. A person confronts a partner about relationship issues. Fixed position: I must make them understand my perspective. Result: escalation, emotional flooding, dialogue becomes argument. If the position was not fixed, the response could be relational: listen for the structure beneath the content, recognize defensive patterns in both parties, shift approach when current path is not working. Most people believe their collapse under pressure is because they don't know what to do. This is incorrect. They collapse because their mind has become bewildered, lost in the gap between what they expected and what is happening. The ancient strategists made a clear distinction. Bewilderment is not the void. Bewilderment is confusion, paralysis, cognitive overload. The void is clarity without fixed position. Bewildered people feel lost. People operating from the void feel clear precisely because they are not attached to any particular outcome. The situation is what it is. The response emerges from what the situation requires, not from what the person needed it to be. Collapse under pressure is not personal weakness. It is untrained perception. The mind is doing what it was designed to do: identify threats, narrow focus, prepare for defense. The problem is that most modern pressure does not require the response that evolution built. And without training, the mind cannot override its default programming. The person who collapses is not failing. They are simply operating with the perceptual structure they were given, which was optimized for different circumstances. The strategist who remains functional has rebuilt that structure. This is not talent. It is training. And training of this depth is rare. The samurai approach did not attempt to control fear. It trained the structure of awareness itself so that the situation could not generate the cascade that leads to fear. This distinction is critical. Controlling fear is downstream. The emotion has already appeared, and willpower attempts to suppress it. Training perception is upstream. The situation is perceived in a way that does not trigger the emotional cascade in the first place. A samurai facing a duel did not tell himself to be calm. He perceived the duel as a strategic situation requiring response, not as a threat requiring emotional management. The perception itself prevented the collapse. The strategist did not pursue calm. He pursued accurate perception. Calm emerged naturally from accurate perception. When the mind sees the situation clearly, distance, timing, opponent's capability, environmental factors, available options, there is nothing to fear. Fear requires uncertainty. Accurate perception reduces uncertainty. Not to zero, that is impossible, but to the point where the mind has enough information to respond strategically rather than reactively. The samurai in combat was not serene. He was focused. The stillness others observed was not emotional emptiness. It was cognitive clarity. This is perhaps the most important shift. The trained strategist learned to interpret pressure as signal, not danger. When the opponent attacks, the attack contains information: his speed, his timing, his preferred technique, his level of control. That information is valuable. The fighter who interprets the attack as threat focuses on survival. The fighter who interprets it as information focuses on opportunity. Same attack, Different interpretation. One fighter is already defensive. The other is already looking for the opening. This interpretive shift was trained through countless repetitions until it became automatic. Under pressure, the strategist's first response was not, "How do I defend?" It was, "What is this showing me?" In training, the principle was clear. The internal bearing in combat must be identical to the internal bearing in normal circumstances. This sounds impossible. How can facing death feel the same as sitting in a quiet room? The answer is not that the strategist felt nothing. It is that he trained the structure of his awareness to remain consistent regardless of external circumstances. His body might experience fear signals. His awareness did not narrow. His heart rate might accelerate. His perception remained broad. The physical response occurred, but it did not command his attention. It was information, like any other sensation. He remained the observer of his internal state, not the captive of it. There is a technique for managing panic before it fully forms. The strategist trained to recognize the first signal that pressure was beginning to narrow his awareness. The tightening of breath, the slight narrowing of vision, the acceleration of thought. At the first sign, the response was not to fight the sensation but to expand attention deliberately. Broaden the gaze. Slow the breath. Feel the feet on the ground. This was not calming technique. It was a way of interrupting the cascade before it gained momentum. Most people wait until panic is fully present, then try to suppress it. The strategist interrupted the formation process. A fire is easier to extinguish at the spark than at the blaze. When facing an opponent, the strategist trained to see the situation from the opponent's perspective. This served two purposes. First, it revealed strategic information, what the opponent could see, what he could not see, what options were available to him. Second, it prevented total absorption in personal fear. The moment the mind shifts perspective to see from the opponent's position, it is no longer collapsed into personal threat. It has achieved distance. This distance is not emotional detachment. It is perceptual flexibility. The ability to shift viewpoint at will prevents fixation. Fixation is where panic breeds. Two fighters meet. One has trained in this method. One has not. Both are skilled. Both understand technique. The difference appears in the first 3 seconds. The untrained fighter assesses, is he faster? Does he have longer reach? Can I win? His awareness is consumed by threat assessment. The trained fighter assesses, his stance is slightly off balance. He is breathing shallow. He wants to attack first. One mind is asking, can I survive? The other is asking, where is the opening? 3 seconds later, the duel begins. The outcome is often already determined, not by skill, but by the structure of awareness each fighter brought to the moment. The strategist trained to recognize rhythm in all situations. Every person has a rhythm, the speed of their speech, the pattern of their breathing, the tempo of their movements. Under pressure, most people's rhythm destabilizes. They speed up, become erratic, lose the natural flow. The strategist maintained his rhythm regardless of circumstances. And more importantly, he learned to read the opponent's rhythm and recognize the moment it broke. The moment the opponent's rhythm destabilized was the moment of opportunity. This required a quality of attention that most people do not develop, the ability to perceive pattern over time while under immediate threat. There is a final state reached by very few, where external circumstances genuinely cannot disturb internal equilibrium. This is not numbness. It is not detachment from reality. It is a perceptual structure so stable that nothing can destabilize it. The strategist who reached this state could face overwhelming odds and remain functional because his awareness was not dependent on circumstances. Modern psychology calls this state flow, or presence, or various other names. The samurai who achieved it called it the body of a rock, not because it was hard or inflexible, but because it could not be moved from its center. Pressure could be applied from any direction. The center remained stable. The method was simple but not easy. Maintain the same internal bearing in all circumstances. Practice perceiving pressure as information. Train the awareness to remain broad even when instinct demands narrowing. Recognize the first signal of collapse and interrupt it before momentum builds. Repeat this thousands of times across hundreds of situations until the response becomes automatic. There was no shortcut. There was no weekend seminar. There was repetition until the new structure replaced the old. Most people never complete this training because they do not understand what they are building. They think they are learning to stay calm. They are actually rebuilding the structure of perception itself. A samurai who had completed this training could enter situations that would paralyze others and remain functional. Not because he was braver, but because he perceived differently. The situation that looked like a crisis to others looked like a strategic problem to him. And strategic problems have solutions. Crises do not. The difference between crisis and problem is entirely perceptual. Change the perception, and pressure loses its power. The principles that kept samurai functional under lethal threat apply to modern pressure without modification. The context is different. The underlying mechanism is identical. Modern pressure, professional, social, relational, triggers the same narrowing of awareness that physical threat triggered centuries ago. The person who can maintain broad perception under modern pressure gains the same advantage the strategist had in combat. They see options others miss. They remain functional when others collapse. They make strategic decisions while others make reactive errors. A professional enters a high-stakes meeting. The old framework, I must perform well. My ideas must be accepted. I cannot look incompetent. This creates fixed positions. Every challenge to those positions triggers defense. The new framework, this is a strategic interaction. Information will be exchanged. Some outcomes are more favorable than others. I will respond to what actually occurs, not what I hope occurs. Same meeting, different internal structure. The first person is defending positions. The second is reading the field and adapting. Someone escalates emotionally. The old framework, I must either dominate this interaction or withdraw from it. Both options are fixed positions, aggression or submission. The new framework, this person's rhythm has destabilized. They are operating reactively. I can maintain my rhythm while they lose theirs. The interaction will resolve once their energy depletes. Same confrontation, different perception. The first person is locked in combat. The second is observing a pattern and waiting for the natural resolution point. A social situation where judgment is present. People watching, evaluating, forming opinions. The old framework, I must control how others perceive me. I must appear confident, competent, likable. This is impossible to maintain, which guarantees anxiety. The new framework, others will form whatever perception they form. My task is to remain consistent with my own bearing. Their interpretation is their process, not mine. Same social pressure, different relationship to it. The first person is attempting to control the uncontrollable. The second has released what cannot be held. The technical change is simple. Where the mind previously interpreted pressure as threat requiring defense, it now interprets pressure as intensity requiring response. Threat implies potential harm that must be prevented. Intensity implies heightened engagement that must be navigated. Threat narrows awareness and triggers protection. Intensity sharpens awareness and triggers adaptation. The situation does not change. The interpretive framework does. A presentation is not a threat to survival. It is an intense interaction with specific strategic requirements. Once the interpretation shifts, the nervous system response shifts. The cascade that leads to panic does not trigger because the initial signal is not coded as threat. Most people frame pressure situations as tests they might fail. The strategist frames them as situations requiring appropriate response. Test framing creates pass/fail binaries that intensify pressure. Situation framing creates problem-solving orientation that reduces it. This is not positive thinking. It is accurate categorization. A difficult conversation is not a test of worth. It is a situation with multiple possible outcomes that will be determined by how each party responds. When framed accurately, the pressure decreases because the stakes are no longer existential. Advanced application involves learning to see the structure of pressure situations rather than getting lost in content. Content is what is being discussed. Structure is how the interaction is unfolding. Untrained people focus entirely on content. What is being said, what should be said next, whether the content is favorable or unfavorable. Trained people see structure. Who is controlling the rhythm of the interaction, when energy is rising or falling, where the natural resolution points are, what patterns are repeating. Content changes constantly. Structure is predictable. The person who sees structure can navigate the interaction regardless of content. Once perception has been retrained, pressure stops feeling like pressure. It feels like intensity, and intensity, unlike pressure, can be enjoyable. Athletes describe this state. Competition is intense but not stressful because their perception is trained. Musicians experience it. Performance is intense but not anxious because their awareness remains broad. The strategist in combat experienced it. The duel was intense but not paralyzing because his perception was structured correctly. Modern people can develop the same perceptual structure. The context is different. The training method is the same. Repetition under gradually increasing intensity until the new structure becomes automatic. The application is not a set of steps to follow. It is a shift in how situations are perceived before conscious thought begins. That shift cannot be installed through instruction. It develops through repeated exposure to pressure while maintaining the commitment to broad awareness. Each time pressure appears and the awareness remains broad, the new structure strengthens. Each time pressure appears and awareness narrows, the old structure reinforces. The training is simply choosing which structure to reinforce, moment after moment, until the choice becomes automatic. The number of people who develop this level of perceptual stability is small, not because the knowledge is hidden, but because the training is demanding and the results are not immediate. Most people prefer the illusion of quick fixes, a breathing technique, a mindset shift, a motivational framework. These may provide temporary relief. They do not rebuild the structure of perception. That requires years of consistent practice under varying conditions. The person who completes this training becomes rare by definition. Not superior, just different. Operating from a perceptual framework most people never develop. There is a particular quality that becomes visible in people who have trained this way. In moments when others accelerate, they stabilize. When others' voices rise, theirs remains level. When others become reactive, they remain responsive. This is not performance. It is not a mask worn over anxiety. It is genuine perceptual stability. They are not experiencing the situation the way others are experiencing it. Their awareness is structured differently. And that difference in structure produces a difference in capability that others can sense but rarely understand. Centuries ago, this training was embedded in a warrior class that lived with constant pressure. The capability was more common then because the necessity was absolute: develop this or die. Modern life rarely enforces that necessity. People can function adequately without ever developing deep perceptual stability. They experience more stress, make more reactive errors, live with more internal chaos, but they survive. The evolutionary pressure is gone. Therefore, the capability atrophies. Those who develop it now do so by choice, not necessity. That makes them outliers. There is no instruction here to begin training tomorrow. No promise that 30 days of practice will transform capability. No suggestion that this is the key to success, happiness, or fulfillment. It is simply an explanation of how a specific group of people, facing a specific type of pressure, developed a specific perceptual structure that kept them functional when others would have collapsed. That structure can be developed in modern contexts. Whether it should be is a question each person answers through their own assessment of what their life requires. The strategist who mastered this way did not announce his capability. It became evident through action, or more precisely, through the absence of reaction. Where others panicked, he moved with precision. Where others made reactive errors, he made strategic decisions. Where others collapsed under intensity, he functioned with clarity. The difference was not visible in any single moment. It accumulated over time, years of consistent performance under varying pressure. And eventually, the pattern became undeniable. This person operated from a different foundation than most. Not better, different. Stable where others were reactive. Clear where others were confused. Functional where others fragmented. Pressure reveals structure. Most people discover in the moment of intensity that they have none. Their perception narrows. Their thoughts spiral. Their capability degrades. This is not weakness. It is simply what happens when awareness has not been trained to remain stable under stress. The samurai who survived long enough to master strategy understood this completely. They built a structure of perception that pressure could not collapse. Not through courage, not through willpower, through precise, patient, relentless training of awareness itself. That training is still possible. The principles have not changed. The necessity is different, but the method remains. And the result, for those who complete the training, is the same. A quality of stability that most people never develop and can barely recognize when they encounter it. Silent, functional, unmoved,